Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and it's time for part 3 of the Q&A, so let me get my hat on and get to this first question. Jason, what are your views on the idea that training lower body steals gains from the upper body? A typical natty will only gain about 15 pounds of muscle, so cannot an argument be made that keeping lower body muscle gains at a minimum is actually desirable, so that you can make bigger upper body gains? Surely it won't end up with chicken legs if your overall muscle gains are so limited without drugs. Alright, actually it's not 15 pounds. I tell people 20, 25 pounds is reasonable for most people. But here's where people mess this up. This is just a silly excuse not to train legs. That's what this is. Alright, this is another excuse, because let me ask you a question. Why do you think that your body has limits on how much muscle it will gain? Do you think it's because those limits are set because your body says, nope, I'm going to allow 20 pounds of muscle to be gained over this person's body, and if they only train their biceps, it's going to be 10 pounds of muscle added to each bicep? No, it doesn't work that way. Why? Because your biceps have a limited amount of size they're going to gain without drugs with a given hormone range. And why? Because you have a given number of muscle fibers. Unless you find a way to increase those muscle fibers through hyperplasia, which some drugs are believed to do, it doesn't seem to happen from weight training. All right, you're not increasing the amount of muscle fibers you have there to any significant degree, at least. Muscle fibers are only going to get so thick in any given hormonal environment. They're only going to gain so much size on a given frame, a piece of bone that they're wrapped around. That is your limiting factor. Your limiting factors there are the size of your frame, the amount of muscle fibers you have, stuff like that, the structural issue of it. It doesn't mean that if you don't train certain muscles that your limit, that limit is set by some number. That limit is set because a given frame and a given set of musculature will only grow so much. It's not about your whole body. It's about each individual muscle on any given person's body will only hypertrophy so much in any given hormonal environment without additional assistance. They will only get so big because each muscle fiber will only thicken a certain amount from years of training. And once all those muscle fibers start approaching those limits of how thick they're going to get, and particularly stretch across a given frame, a given distance from tendon to tendon, that's where your limits are. And those limits tend to add up to 20 pounds, 25 pounds, 30 pounds for really tall, thick-framed individuals based across their whole frame. It's not that the limit is the number, it's that that number is achieved by looking at the overall limits of the whole being when they're all added up. All right, so by not training your hamstrings, for example, it's not going to be that your body's going to let the extra hamstring hypertrophy go to your biceps. It's that your biceps have a limited amount of size they'll gain. Just like your hamstrings have a limited amount of size that they are going to gain. It's all those individual different limits here, when you add them together is where we come up with that rough estimate. That seems to be about what people can gain. But you don't get to skip certain areas and then all of a sudden increase the limit somewhere else. It doesn't work that way. It's not a video game where you plug and play your stats and you program them in. Oh, I've got 25 stat points. Let me put them wherever I want. No, there's still limits. You can't put them beyond a certain limit at any given point, and if you choose not to use those stat points, you just flush them down the toilet, or they sit in holding until you choose to use them in a place where they have limits left as far as where you could go. That would be a better way to look at it, that they just sit there on hold. You don't get to just allocate things above their limitations just because you got extra points to throw around. That would be a way to look at it for the gamers out there. All right, next question. Hi Jason, I was wondering why you heavily promote the push press for strength and hypertrophy but not using band resistance on other exercises for the same goals. Both techniques seem to reduce the weight at the bottom or the hardest part of the lift, but you have argued that the latter is more for sport-specific training than for general strength and hypertrophy. Thanks for all the advice. The reason you're coming to this conclusion is you're misunderstanding the push press. I'm not telling people the push press is useful because of the accommodating resistance. It isn't necessarily accommodating resistance. The push press is more useful because it involves other muscles in an explosive manner. All right, if those bands were part of your body and they were a muscle, and they're changing the resistance curve, that would be different. The push press isn't doing that. The push press is allowing you to use leg drive, which builds your quads more, builds your glutes more, builds your core more. All right, it's not a band adding resistance, it's your lower body allowing you to lift more weight. And that initial inertia doesn't always mean that the weight is lighter at the top, because you're still using that initial inertia. Your delts might be doing the same amount of work with 10 or 15 more pounds on the bar with the push press than the strict press would have been with the lighter weight. It doesn't mean that the delts are working harder at the bottom or the top or anything else. It could be the same amount of overall work. All right. The added advantage is that the lower body gets to be involved more. So you're recruiting other muscles and you're training your body to use the lower body explosively in conjunction with the upper body. That translates to better performance on the field, because you're not training your body to only use your delts and your triceps to press over your head. You're training it to use your legs for drive, so that when you hit someone on a playing field, you're training to hit them with your full body and push. It is tremendously more effective. You will be stronger overall from doing that. Just like that would be like saying a chin-up is more effective for athleticism than just doing a curl. Well, of course it is. There's other big muscles involved. A curl's only building the biceps. The chin-up's involving the core and the back more. All right, you get the idea here? It's a bigger exercise using more muscles. Now, the other added advantage, people say, well, why would that help with hypertrophy on the upper body more? Well, because it's also putting a heavier eccentric load. So we're getting more body, full body power in it, right? More explosiveness, but we're getting more eccentric loading on things like the triceps, because they're having to can handle the weight on the way down. All right, your quads and everything that help you explode the weight a little bit to use a slightly heavier weight, they're not really taking the eccentric load. The upper body is. Well, eccentric loading is a useful hypertrophy tool. And like I've said before, eccentrics are not necessary for hypertrophy. They're not necessary. You can do all of training that has zero eccentric work and still gain muscle maximally with enough load. But eccentrics are a useful tool. They're still a useful tool in the toolbox. You're giving more eccentric loading. It's using a good hypertrophy tool thrown in there for the upper body, while training the whole body to work as one unit on the explosive concentric side. So that's why I'm recommending it. And comparing it to band work, you're really misunderstanding accommodating resistance versus doing a full body exercise with an exercise that's normally an upper body. These are not comparable in any way. And again, the eccentric from the band, you're not necessarily getting all the same eccentric loading. Bands are a totally different animal. Again, you're talking about things like doing overspeed eccentrics. You're talking about a totally different strength curve. That strength curve is not as different on the push press versus the overhead press, because you just have assistance helping you accelerate it all the way through. The bands actually change the deceleration curve and everything at the top. They're a totally different animal, not even remotely the same, and they have their place. So hopefully that clarifies that. All right, next question. Hey Jason, what do you think of just regular corn syrup as a sweetener? I know that mostly fructose is a reason why sugar is problematic for the liver, but pure corn syrup is just glucose, so shouldn't it be more acceptable? Why do people not use this as much? All right, great question, and here's the thing. Corn syrup used to be used as a sweetener, but as humans have developed more processed foods, we seem to have desensitized our taste buds. People who eat sweet stuff and sugar their whole life have desensitized taste buds. And so if you've grown up eating high fructose corn syrup's not really going to taste sweet to you. 100 years ago, it was a sweetener because it was sweeter than the foods people had. They could add corn syrup to stuff, it would thicken it up, and it was mostly glucose-based. Yeah, it doesn't have all the fructose. And people need to know high fructose corn syrup is corn syrup that has been put through an enzymatic process that converts like half of the glucose in it into fructose, so that it makes it dramatically sweeter. I mean, high fructose corn syrup is dramatically sweeter than corn syrup. It's not just like a little sweeter, it's a lot sweeter. And I don't know what that number is, but I think it might be something like 5 or 10 or something times as much sweetness per drop in it, per gram. It's a lot. So people now need hyper sweet foods. And so if people aren't using corn syrup, yeah, it would probably be the healthiest of the calorie sweeteners we have out there, and it's cheap, it's easy to make. It's actually cheaper than the high fructose corn syrup because it's the same thing with one less process. All right, but the problem is it's not sweet enough by modern sweetness standards of what we think we need to make food taste sweet because of what we've grown up with. It's not sweet enough to be a sweetener by modern standards. It's just not going to be anywhere near as sweet as what people are used to. So from a health perspective, it would be about 10 times better. But the problem is it's not going to make the food taste as good, and all the baked goods and everything aren't going to taste as sweet as all these table sugar and high fructose corn syrup and everything that we have available today. At one time, it was used for that very successfully. Unfortunately, because we've changed things, it's just not going to be sweet enough for most people's purposes. So it's going to be hard to get it widespread. But would we be healthier as a society if we did that? Of course we would. We would be a lot better off. Because again, it would have less problems with the issues of fructose overload, the liver issues associated with that, the insulin sensitivity issues, the overeating problems then associated with it. But it's just not going to be as sweet. The food wouldn't be as sweet, so people aren't going to use it. It's just not sweet enough to be considered a true sweetener by modern standards and what people have come to expect in their food. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time in part 4.